Okay, good morning, everyone. Shabbat tov, boker tov. So, we are back. We had a bit of a hiatus last week. Believe it or not, a few people asked me last week, is there a shir tomorrow? Yeah. It's Erev Chag. So, the answer is no. The Gemara says that Eliyahu doesn't come on Erev Shabbat or Erev Chag because of the tircha. It's also busy. So, kol v'chomer, we don't have a Tzurba Rabbanan shir, but we are back. We are back. So, we're picking up just about from where we left off. We've been going through the melachot of food preparation and of opening bottles and opening cans and opening food packages. Now that we've got everything open, we've had our food and it's made a mess on the floor. The question is, can we sweep up the floor on Shabbat? That's going to be the topic of today's shiur. Halachot related to home maintenance, beginning on page 253 in volume 19. Actually, I just want to read something to you. We'll begin that. So it's a very, very interesting topic not everybody's aware of. There are a lot of questions that are raised about sweeping the floors on Shabbat. So when I was preparing this shiur, I remembered, I'm sure it's all still fresh in your minds, that we had Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat this year. Right? It's not going to happen for the next 20 years. But I was sure that there was a halacha that talks about sweeping the floors of the chametz crumbs that are left. So I looked it up. So the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Mem Daled, which is a whole siman. She'll say it's not going to be relevant for another 20 years, but about what to do on Erev Pesach, which is on Shabbat. Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: he says, on the Shabbat, which is Erev Pesach, he says, after you've eaten your morning meal, shake off the tablecloth, right? Meaning clean out whatever chametz crumbs you already have left. Put the kelim away with the rest of the klei chametz. Okay, and he says what to do if you have any food left. So the Mishnah Berurah over there says, now listen over here. The Mishnah Berurah says, the Shulchan Aruch said, shake out the tablecloth. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Otan pelim dakim v'kinoach. Wait, I'm looking at the wrong one. Yeah. He's Otan pelim dakim v'kinoach hakealot and tzarich lotian milshuto. You have very, very, very small crumbs. Don't worry about it. You don't need to get rid of it. That's not considered food. Okay. Nonetheless, it's good to sweep the house. Okay. Remember, this is talking about Shabbat. So what does he say? He says, He says it's good to get a non-Jew to come and sweep your house. What the implication is, either everybody has maids, or that you aren't allowed to sweep the floor on Shabbat. There seems to be a problem. Says if you don't have, so then you need to do some sort of a shinui. In other words, clear implication over here from the Mishnah Berurah is that we are not allowed to sweep the floors on Shabbat. Okay, so this is Masim B'chol Yom that we sweep the floor. So what is going on here? What would be the issur of sweeping the floor on Shabbat? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? How is it allowed? Etc. So let's go through the sources. As I say, after once now that we've learned that we can open up all the packages, so we for sure have to sweep the floor. So what are we going to do? So page 255, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says the following. We have a Braita on Shabbat Daf Aleph, and the Braita tells us as follows. It says Tana Rabbanan. We have here a list of a number of activities. One of them is not brought here. We've discussed this in the past because one of the activities that is listed in this Braita is related to milking cows. Today, that is not our topic, but we're talking about some of the other activities which we always skip over the list and say, whatever. So now we understand what they are. So page 255, source number 1 says Tan Rabbanan Hamachabed v'Hamerabetz. Okay, so again, there are other things which are listed in this Gemara, in this Braita, which don't concern us for now. What does concern us is a mechabed, which is one who sweeps. The merabetz, when it sprinkles water. In those days of the Gemara, it was very common to have a dirt floor. So they would sprinkle water to kind of get rid of the dust. Okay, it's something they would do, but it says, so these activities, shagag b'Shabbat, chayav chatat, hezir b'yom tov lokeh arba'im, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. V'chachamim omrim mechadze v'chadze, no ela mishum shvut. Okay, so we have a machloket between Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, whether these activities are prohibited on a d'oraita level or on a d'Rabbanan level. But seemingly we go with Chachamim to say that it's eno ela mishum shvut. So what would be the shvut when it comes to sprinkling or sweeping, maybe sweeping the floors? The idea here is the following: that sprinkling the water in and of itself is not going to be any sort of isur doraita, but this is the sort of preliminary stage to sweeping out and maybe to smoothing out the floors, right? That's what we're concerned about. If you have a dirt floor and you have holes, etc., and you're going to go and smooth them out and level that out, that would be an isur. That would be an isur doraita. So it could be even sweeping the floor, just sweeping the floor to get rid of the dirt, to keep it clean. Okay, that would not be an isur doraita, but you may come to fill in the holes, to level out the floor. It's called la shvuye gumot, and that would be an isur dorabanan. Therefore, that would be an isur doraita, excuse me, and therefore there would be an isur dorabanan even so as not to come to do that. Later on in the same daf, we see the Gemara says in source number 2, it says Amei Marshala Zilcha b'Mechuzah. Okay, Mechuzah was the city. It was where Meimar would allow doing the sprinkling of water there. Why? Tamamai Amor Abanat. Maybe you're going to come to level out the floors. So he says, yeah, there are no holes in the floors. In other words, these houses have stone floors. So we're going to see that's going to be a big nafkamina, because nowadays most of us hopefully don't have dirt floors. Would it be a difference just if your house? What if it's just your house that's a stone floor? What if most of the homes in the city are stone floors? Okay, we'll see. But Amema says over here that in a case where there is no concern, where there are no unpaved floors, right? All the floors are with tiles, so therefore there's no issue in terms of sprinkling this water. Then the Gemara says, Tana Shachachama Me'abetzet Beitav Shabbat, says there is a way, even if you have the dirt floors, to get to sprinkle the water on Shabbat. How would you do it? As you go and you're washing dishes and different things in different parts of the house, so some of the water spills over. We pass like Rabbi Shimon, who says that Davash Eino Mitkaven, right? If it's not a psik reisha, that would be mutar, and that relates to that. Okay, so that's the first source that we have that seems to talk about. So again, it sounds like sweeping in and of itself is not necessarily, certainly not isur doraita, but the shvuye gumot maybe, right, smoothing out the floor. That's why we say that sprinkling this water might be a problem, but it seems to be that would be a problem seemingly on a Drabanan level. We have another Gemara in source number 3 later on in Masechet Shabbat, which again over here the Gemara seems to indicate very strongly that that there would be a prohibition of sweeping. Here the context is muktzah. We're discussing the muktzah status potentially of a broom. So the Gemara says as follows: it says, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, Machbedot shel milta mutar letaltalam b'Shabbat, aval shel tamra lo. Because they had different types of brooms in the days of the Gemara. They had brooms that were made of fine wool garments. Okay, this is designed more for cleaning the table. And you had a broom which was made from a date palm. That's essentially what it was. That's why, by the way, the word lechabed means to sweep, comes from machbeda, is a cluster of dates. That's where the word actually comes from. So it says that broom that comes from the date palm may not be moved. Rabbi Elazar Me'ashel Tamra. He says even that you can't, even that you could move. So it says, what are we talking about? Okay, if we mean that you are moving it, so now we're getting into a little bit of the laws of muktzah without getting into all the technicalities, but mentioned this a number of times. We'll say it again. What we generally talk about and call muktzah is not actually muktzah. Right? There is a gzeira against tiltul kelim. When we think of a kli shemalachto le'isur, something which you cannot move because its usual purpose is for something forbidden, so we call that muktzah, but it doesn't actually mean muktzah. And that is the most lenient of all the forms of those objects which you aren't allowed to move. And we say kli shemalachto le'isur, you're allowed to move letzorech gufo or letzorech makomo, meaning if you need to use that object for a permitted purpose, Or the example the Gemara gives is if you have a hammer, right, when you use it to crack open the nuts, that would be the tzorach gufo. Or the tzorach makomo. Let's say you have it in a certain place. I want to access the table, but I have this klish menachtor, so that's there. So then I can move. So then he says, okay, so the Gemara has a discussion. What are we talking about when we say you're allowed to move it or not? We're talking about the tzorach gufo makomo, which we just explained, would be permitted. Or what's called mechamal atzel, which means to protect the object. That's a little bit more complicated. But the point is that the Gemara says that if it's l'tzorach gufo makomo, then there would be no problem. Then you would be allowed to move this broom. In other words, we understand that the broom is a kli shemelachto le'isur. Why would it be a kli shemelachto le'isur? The implication is that it's general melacha, which is sweeping the house, would be forbidden. Okay, so that's the second source where we see that sweeping the floor would generally seem to be prohibited on Shabbat. So now that's the Gemara. Now we have a machloket amongst the Rishonim exactly how to understand this and how to understand this prohibition. So first up, we have source number 4. We have the Bar Halachot Gedolot, the Bahag. So Bahag says as follows: Rabbi Abba Marav Chia Bar Ashi Amarav. מכבדות שהמילה מותר לטלטלם בשבת, תסתור so the Knesset will be okay, אבל בשעתם אמרה לא. דהיינו רכבה דהוציא. In other words, they may not be, these probably may not be moved. רבי אלעזר אומר, אף בשעתם, Okay, we're back. I apologize. Not sure quite what happened over there. We just said that according to the Bahag, and the Rif, two other Rishonim, would say that even a dirt floor you're allowed to sweep because you don't have the intent to fill up the holes. However, Rashi, source number 6, says Tamra, Ka'en Shelanu, so like our brooms, he says, Lechabed et habayit, da'asur mishum shvoye gumot, demoder Rabbi Shimon b'psik reisha v'lo yamut. Okay, exactly, there seems to be a slight difference exactly what the gear says in the Gemara and how you learn it. But Rashi says, since Rabbi Shimon agrees, even though Rabbi Shimon we follow says Eino mikaven is mutar, when it's a psik reisha, when it's definitely going to happen, then that is going to be forbidden. He says if you're sweeping a dirt floor, you're going to level out the floor, you're going to fill up the holes. I don't care if it's mikaven or eino mikaven, it's a psik reisha, it's going to happen. And therefore it would be forbidden. Okay, so that is Rashi. Now, Tosfos, now we have a number of different Rishonim here who hold like Rashi, that sweeping the floor is going to be forbidden, but they give different reasons as to why it is. So Rashi understands that it's a problem because of a shvuye gumot. Tosfot over here, source number 7, Tosfot quotes the Bahag. He says, Bahag shali kibud. He says that they said it was mutar, but this does not seem correct. In bold, says Tosfot, sweeping is going to be forbidden. Why? Because you are moving dirt you're moving dirt from its place, you're moving dust. Okay, what Rabbi Shimon allowed was the sprinkling water that we said at the beginning, not the moving, not the sweeping. Okay, seemingly, what's the problem here? That you're moving afar seems to be it's got to do with muktzah. Muktzah, we learned in Masechet Beitzah in the first parak, a whole discussion, but if a person wants to bring afar into their home, and in those days they would use afar for all sorts of things, to cover things up, or if you were doing shchita, to cover up the blood, or for covering up, to keep things clean, and if it's not designated from the beginning of Shabbat, so there's a whole discussion there regarding muktzah. So that's what seems to understand that this is related to muktzah. The Shara Tziyun over here adds also maybe you might even make a hole when you're moving the dirt. You might make a hole again. We spoke about filling up a hole, but making a hole would also be a problem. It says over here, lo be'aru divrehem im hakavana mishum tiltu afar she'eno min hamukhan or mishum asiyot gufot al yedei guma al yedei chafila. It says Tosfot didn't explain what's the problem. They said mesiz afar. So there's two possibilities here what it could mean. Either because we just explained tiltul afar she'eno min hamukhan, meaning that you're moving muktzah, or mishum asiyat kumah l'dei chafila, by moving earth you are digging, essentially making a hole. Okay, he says gam b'zeh leike isur d'oraita. This would not be an isur d'oraita. Why? V'atam da'ino tzarich la'guma, because you don't actually need that hole. If you're digging a hole, right, that would be a prohibition of boneh. If you need it, if you don't need it, so then would be maybe melacha shana tzarcha legufa, or maybe less than that. But in any event, would be an isur d'rabanan. U'me'agra mashma d'kavana mishum titul afar v'chein mashma mordochi. Okay, many of the he quotes the Gra, the Mordechai, who seem to imply that the reason is because of muktzah. But nonetheless, it appears that we have both reasons. Okay. A third explanation here is brought by the Rambam. The Rambam in source number 9, in Hilchot Shabbat, he says, "Asur lechabed et hakarka, shema yashveh gumot, ela im ken haya atzuf b'avanim." Umutar lezalef mayim. In other words, he says you cannot sweep the ground. Shema yashveh gumot. You may come to fill up holes. Right, meaning that sounds a little bit more like it's a sort of exerad rabbanan. Not that while I am sweeping necessarily I'll fill the holes now, but it might be that if I'm going to allow this, then you may come to do that as well. In any event, but he gives you a heta. He says, okay, so says the Rambam, if you're sprinkling the water, I'm not concerned now that you're going to come in and fill up the holes. If you're sweeping, then I am concerned. But what's significant is the Rambam says, if your floor, again, he's not talking about all the floors in the city or anything else, but if your floor right now is not a dirt floor, but it's a paved floor, it's a stone floor, so then there would be no problem. You're not going to fill up any holes. And therefore, that would seem to be mutar. So just to summarize until this point, we saw like this. We saw in the Gemara that said that sweeping the floor, sprinkling water on the floor and sweeping on the floor seems to be a prohibition. Seems to be a prohibition to Rabbanan. Okay, but we saw that seemed to be problematic. Why was that problematic? So first of all, we have a machloket rishonim. According to the Bahag, everything here is talking about a dirt floor. According to the Bahag and the Rif, actually, even with a dirt floor, you can sweep it. There's no problem. That's fine. There's no prohibition. Even if you're going to come and end up leveling out the floor, that is not mitkaven, Rabbi Shimon, and that would be fine. That is how they learn. But as we said, that may be based on a different gear so that they have in the Gemara. Most of the other Rishonim agree that sweeping a dirt floor on Shabbat is going to be a problem. Why is it going to be a problem? Either because you are unintentionally leveling out the floor, filling up holes, but it's going to happen. It's a psik reisha, that was Rashi. Or because we have a problem that you're moving dirt, so it might be muktzeh, it might be a problem of boneh, right, of actually digging up a hole, or because you might intentionally come to fill up the holes according to the Rambam, and therefore we say a dirt floor to To sweep a dirt floor is going to be prohibited. What if it's not a dirt floor, right? Like most of the floors that we have nowadays. So we already saw in the Gemara a leniency for this. The Rambam writes very clearly that the Rambam says that if it's not a dirt floor, you can sweep it. But have a look over here, the Sefer Tzurba. Sefer Tzurba in source number 10 says, Afilu bayit sheyesh la ritzpat avanim, even a house that has a stone floor, so therefore there's not going to be a concern, as we discussed, asur lechabed, nonetheless you cannot sweep. Deshayach ashvuya gumot bein ashurot. So why? He says because you may have between the holes, you might be, or between the legs, you may end up filling it up. In other words, it might be that there is that maybe the rationale still applies somehow on a smaller scale, or even if the rationale does not apply here, we say this is the gzera d'Rabbanan, gzera of this floor to a dirt floor, right? If we're going to allow sweeping up other floors, then you're going to end up sweeping up dirt floors, and as well. You could ask, why is that not a gzera l'gzera? According to Rambam, it would seem to be a gzera l'gzera. But we saw there were other explanations as to why that is, why that would be a problem. Okay, so extremely stringent view of the Sefer Tzurba. The Mishnah Berurah that we started off, remember the Mishnah Berurah we started off with, for those who came late, we said that when it comes to Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbat, we talk about what do we do with the crumbs that are left. So the Mishnah Berurah says, it says you shake everything off and you trample on them and it's fine, there's no problem. The Mishnah Berurah said it's better if you can, nonetheless, to sweep out the crumbs. But he said do it by a non-Jew. In other words, there seems to be a problem. So that seems to be following this Sefer Tzurba, at least until now. Let's see how the Achronim paskin on this. Let's see the Beit Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah. And then we'll try and understand, try and figure out what we do, halacha l'maaseh. So the Beit Yosef says here in source number 11, he says, Le'inyan halacha, keivan shal Rambam v'al Rosh maskimim le'sor lechabed karka she'no me'utzaf, hachi naktinan. Okay, for a dirt floor, everybody agrees, the Rambam, the Rosh, everybody agrees that you cannot sweep, therefore you can't. Why does he mention the Rambam and the Rosh? Remember, the Beit Yosef writes in his introduction, how did he know how to decide the halakha? You have all these different views of the Rishonim. Who are we to come along and decide between the Rosh, the Rambam, the Rif, the Ramban, the Rashi, Ritva, etc., right? So the Beit Yosef says, it's well known, he says he had a Beit Din. When he came to Paskan Halakha and to decide in the Shulchan Aruch, he had a Beit Din of three: the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam. Those are the three of the greatest of Rishonim. And so the Beit Yosef explains that he always goes by the majority. If the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam all agree, so then it's easy. Paskan like them. If they disagree, so you go by the majority. Except, of course, the cases where he doesn't, and that's a whole discussion. But generally speaking, that is the rule. So yeah, you have the Rambam and the Rosh together. Even though the Rif paskin differently, as we saw, but nonetheless, so he says you cannot sweep a dirt floor. Ela im ken, hu makom shepashat haminhag la'atir, dekevan demid rabbananu, ve'yesh lehem gdolim al mi sheismochu ein mochim b'yadam. Very interesting. He says, except for those places where there is the custom has been established to act leniently. Okay, this is based on we have great authorities to rely on, such as the Rif. And therefore, so even a dirt floor says those who had, he says, I would say that it's forbidden if they already have the minhag and and have what it's based on, so then it's okay. That is regarding a dirt floor. Now, karka me'utzaf, a non-dirt floor, tiled or stone floor, etc. Okay, according to the Rif and the Rambam, that's fine. We don't need to worry about the chumrah of the Sefer Tzurba. We can sweep an ordinary floor. Says the Shulchan Aruch, source number 12, Asur lechaved habayit, ela im ken hakarka me'utzaf, yesh metirin afilo beino me'utzaf. Right? So it's like what we saw. When it comes to, he says you cannot sweep the floor unless it is a tiled stone floor. He quotes the yesh matirin, that is the Rif and the Bahag, as he explained in the Beit Yosef, that there are why does he bring me the yesh matirin? Because even though he says it's to be stringent in those communities that have the minhag, showing that they have what to rely on. Okay, but a tiled floor, says Shulchan Aruch, is fine. Comes along the Ramah, source number 13, and he says, "V'yesh machmirin afilu b'mutzaf v'chen noagin v'ein l'shanot." Says the Ramah, when it comes to a floor, even a tiled floor, you can. There are those who are stringent, and that is our minhag. and you cannot change this minhag. Okay, what are we going to do? Maybe we should go back to not opening all the packages on Shabbos. Okay, if we can't sweep the floor. Now the Mishnah Berurah will make sense. He says to have this floor swept by a non-Jew, that would be allowed. וכן על ידי בגד או מטלית או כנף, אבז, הקלים ואינו משווה גומות. Right? So if you use a cloth to sweep, rather a soft garment, rather than something else that's going to fill up the holes, that would be permitted. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah said over there. So let's just explain the rationale here for the leniency. And then we'll ask the question if we always have to be so stringent. So source number 14, Mishnah Berurah says, why is it prohibited? He says, you are moving dirt from its place. Okay, this over here, this is talking about seemingly the dirt floor, right? And you're filling up the gumot, you're filling up the holes, and that is the malacha of binyan. Even though that's not your intent is to tidy up the floor. Your intent is not now to level out all the holes. Nonetheless, as Rashi told us, that's asur because of psik reisha. Okay, that is the Rambam. He says that not that right now, while I'm sweeping, that I'm going, but I'm sweeping, and toch kadei, I'm going to forget, and I'm going to think, oh, I'm sweeping, I'm making everything nice, and I'm going to come to fill out all the holes. Okay. So now we said, when we're dealing with even a tiled floor, you still can't, we still are going to be machmir not to sweep unless it's done by a non-Jew. Obvious question is, if it's a sort for me to do, then it's a sort for me to ask a non-Jew to do it, right? We don't allow, I can't, we'll get to this later, we'll get to the halachot of Amirah Lenochri, but I can't ask him to do something if it's forbidden for me to do. So why are we so lenient here? It says, I know, afilu b'she'eino mu'utzaf. Notice, afilu b'she'eino mu'utzaf. He says, first of all, we're expanding the heter. We're saying, even if it's a dirt floor, you can ask a non-Jew to sweep it. Because we assume that even if I was to sweep, why is it forbidden? It's not forbidden on a doraita level. It's still not enough. But it's not forbidden on a doraita level. Why? Because it's only because of a psik reisha. So after psik reisha, לעניין הגומות, מותר לידי אינו יהודי דבר מילה לאינו יהודי לא כבדין כולן. We say, if I don't intend to perform the malacha, but the malacha is certainly going to be performed because of psik reisha, so that's a fundamental principle of Hilchot Shabbat, which we come back to many times. We say it's forbidden for me to do that. But in other words, the action that I'm doing is not a malacha, but the action I'm doing is inadvertently going to cause a malacha to happen. It's certainly going to happen, therefore I can't do it. But so the klal is that if I'm asking the non-Jew, I'm not asking him to do the malacha, I'm asking him to do an action which in and of itself should be permitted, but there's a psik reisha that's going to take place as well. Okay, that would be a problem for me, but that would not be a problem for him. Okay, and there are other examples we have of this right at the beginning of the Hilchot Shabbat, Reish Nun Gimel, when it comes to heating up certain foods or turning on, there's the whole discussion. If you have food, you ask them to turn on the oven, the heat of the radiator, and you have food on top, and then it's a psik reisha that it's going to get, etc. The point is, if something's forbidden for me, only for the reason of psik reisha, there I am allowed, it's permitted to ask a non-Jew to do it. Therefore, that's why you're allowed to ask the non-Jew to sweep the floor over here.
I'm just contrasting this to what I'm talking about here with psik reisha, like all the time right? But you go back to the Rishonim, right? They have to look at that and they say, okay, we cover the and that's a reason not to worry about it. So, like, I mean, how they basically make the same argument going different directions?
I don't understand. Say again?
They say, we cover the right? Rishonim is for that, right? So they're not worried about it, right? They're saying, like, it's okay, you don't come in, like, the shovel.
Inom mitkaven, and therefore it's not nisur doraita.
Right, I'm saying, because over here, it's pressure, you can't do it at all. Right? Forget the no thing. Right? I'm saying, like, it's like basically the same zero, whether or not you're intending to, whether you're intending to supply product, right? And, like, in some cases they won't say that's, in other cases they won't say no.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
Isn't the early Rishon we're looking at, right? Isn't there a justification to be able to do certain things because we cover like that?
Yes, we say so it's like this. When we say Eino mitkaven, means I'm allowed to do. That's the machloket, classic machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. We pass in Rabbi Shimon, we say Eino mitkaven, you're allowed to. Except if it's a psik reisha, meaning if it's then Eino mitkaven becomes irrelevant. Then we say Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, everybody agrees, psik reisha is asur.
how I'm just wondering in terms of like. In the case of Psik Resha, is stuff intended that will happen? Because it seems.
No. The whole point of Psik Resha is that as a normit kaven, that I'm not intending to perform the melacha. Psik Resha means even though I don't intend it, but it's going to happen. So
I didn't know in the case of someone that says someone that also knows it's going to happen.
So there seems to again there seems to be a different two different understandings whether there is a psik resha or not. Is it maybe a machlokes b'mtziot? I don't know. But that was when we saw there were those rishonim, right? There were those rishonim who said that in this case, since you're a nomit kaven hashvei gumot, therefore it's going to be mutar. Rashi comes along and says, I don't care that you don't mitkaven. It's a psik resha. We were not so. It's not that the Bahag and the Rif were saying even though it's a psik resha, it's going to be mutar. So we have to look at the Bahag and the Rif and we have to say why do they say they don't see a psik resha for whatever reason? I don't know that. Okay. But the point is, but there we go. So what we're saying is, to summarize, a no mitkaven. If I don't intend to perform the malacha, it's mutar unless there's a psik resha, even though I don't intend it, the melacha is definitely going to happen. If we assume that by sweeping the floor, you're doing it, maybe it's got to do with what kind of broom they're using, right? That's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. It says maybe if you use a gentle sweep or the type of cloth, then it's not going to fill in the holes. Okay, so maybe that's what they were talking about. I don't know. But the point, if it's definitely going to happen, it's going to be asur. The chiddush over here is that something which is asur for me because it's psik resha, I can ask a non-Jew to do. That we're not going to be that stringent. Okay, but based on what we've said, we now have a problem. The problem is that since we're all Ashkenazim, we can't sweep our floors on Shabbos, right? We started off, we said, sweeping a dust floor is going to be permitted. There was a minority opinion in the Rishonim that you could sweep a dust floor. Most of the Rishonim said you cannot sweep a dust floor. Why not? We saw three different reasons. Okay, Shulchan Aruch paskins that when it comes to a dust floor, it's a problem. But when it comes to a non-dust floor, there was the Rambam who said that the reason doesn't apply, and therefore it's okay. But the Sefer Truma said that the reason may apply, and even if the reason doesn't apply, we made it Gzeira. Chazal said, since you can't sweep a dust floor, we don't want you to sweep a non-dust floor because you might come to sweep a dust floor. Okay, and therefore the Ramah said we have to be stringent. Bottom line is, at this point, the Ramah says if you don't have a non-Jew to come and sweep your floor for you, you cannot sweep your floor. But Ma'asim b'chol yom, that we sweep our floors on Shabbat. So we all just be Mechalelei Shabbat, Chas v'chalila. Right? That's not the conclusion of the shir. So let's have a look at the Bir Halacha in source number 15. The Bir Halacha in source number 15, he says like this. He says, "V'yesh machmirin afilu b'mutzaf." Okay, there are those who are machmir even with a stone floor. He says, "Ayen mishnah b'la, de'atam u'mishum de'gazrin an mutzaf atu eno mutzaf u'misefra truma." Right, that's what we saw. The Sefer Truma it says we have a gzeira of the stone floor because of the non-stone floor as well. V'hinei lefi zeh, im kol batei ha'il or al kol panim rubam merutzafim b'avanim or b'lvenim. He says, according to this, let's think about the Gzeirah, and let's think about if it applies. If you have a situation where all the homes of the city, or most of the homes of the city are paved or have bricks or on the floor, of course, in other words, they're covered up. If shal demutar lechabed, maybe there it would be permitted. The lo gazu al ruba mipnei miuta. We don't make a Gzeirah on the majority because of the minority. V'lo lirzum bnei el we don't make a decree in one city because of another city. Okay, that relates back to what we saw about sprinkling water in the Gemara in the case of Mechuzah. Ulam, he says like this: Yesh od svara acheret b'sefer Truma sham, the bein al-rovadim. Remember, the Sefer Truma had another reason. He said it's not just the gezerah. He said it's because you might come to if you have openings in between the layers, right, where you might come to fill up the holes. יש חשש להשוואה גמות אף מוצפים. Okay, so let's skip now to the part which is in bold. He says, לפי זה, כשבתי כולם רובם מוצפים בקשים, אין לחמים מוצפים. So at the end of the day, therefore, says the Bir Halacha, if I have a situation where the majority of homes, or all the homes, which really is the situation today, where thankfully, we don't have dirt floors anymore, but you have...
there is an exception.
One sec, we'll hear that in a moment. But where you have essentially everything is paved, so therefore it would not be a problem to come along and sweep. Where one has to be aware of this, by the way, and we'll get to this in a moment, is what about on Sukkot? when you have, is that what you were going to say? Okay, Baruch shekivanti the dot coin. So we're going to see what happens outside in just a moment. But what we see from right, and the last paragraph, גם נשום מוקצה נחוש אחד, משום דבר שכתב הרשב"א ומותר לפנותם משום דבר כגרף של ראי, ועוד דבר לטלטול מהצד על ידי דבר אחר לצורך שבת. He says, you were concerned before about the question of muktzah, right? At the end of the day, you're moving dirt. So even if we're moving, when we're sweeping up all the dust and all the dirt, whatever you say, what isn't that muktzah? So there's number one, we'll learn later on, there's a category of muktzah, what's called a graf shara'i, which is disgusting things, which is waste you want to get rid of, you're allowed to. Okay, you're allowed to get rid of that. Also, this is not the normal way. You're not picking it up with your hands. It's got what's called tiltum minatzad, and therefore that would be allowed. Okay, so we've moved on. So we've seen now, even according to the Ramah, with stringent, we are going to be allowed to sweep up inside our homes. Yes.
Especially in this city. Right, even if I understand the note before, right, it's not like it's like a brushing of wood. Like, who builds with wood in this city?
Right, he says, but his point is that if it's, but so long as it's tiled or paved or stone or whatever, so long as it's not dust, it's all. Yeah. No.
Right, and then we're not worried about the other which are
no, Muratzaf is not necessarily crushing. No, it's not necessarily. No, but I think it just means to say that it's covered up with a smooth surface. Yeah, okay. But as has been mentioned over here, that helps us inside. But what about outside? Okay, and outside this will be irrelevant when it comes to Sukkot and things like that. So the Shema Shabbat Kilchata over the page, source number 16. Okay, Shema Shabbat Kilchata says Asur letateh makom she'eino mutzaf. So a place which is not paved, you cannot sweep. Ben b'bayit or ben b'chatzer, whether it's in the house or outside the house, the yard, etc. V'im rov habatim b'oto makom einam mutzafim, kol machaneh ohalim. If most of the places, most of the homes now where you are, like you're in a camp of tents and they are not paved, so then asur letateh et habayit gam kasher mutzaf. Then you would have a problem. B'chatzer asur letateh afilu im mutzaf. A yard, he says, would be prohibited even if it's paved. Because most of the yards in the city are not going to be paved. ולכן, סוכה הבנויה בחצר, אסור לטאטא אותה אפילו שהיא בחצר מוצפת. Therefore, you're going to have a problem sweeping inside your sukkah. That is the Shema Shabbat Kilchata. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the footnote over here, says maybe we can be a little bit more lenient than that. He says, Shamati me'agon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal. Again, this is the Shema Shabbat writing in the name of Shlomo Zalman. תיתכן שמרוב הבתים מוצפים, כי אז רואים את החצר המוצפת כהמשך לבית המרוצף. If most of the houses are paved, so we see the chatzer as an extension of the house, and therefore we can view it as paved as well. גם אם אינה מקורה, even if doesn't have a ceiling or whatever, ולא גזרין החצר מוצפת, עד שאינה מוצפת. We don't make a decree we don't make a gzera of a paved courtyard against an unpaved courtyard. Okay, very interesting thing to think about here when we talk about Hilchot Sukkah. And we talk about the Sukkah as being an extension of a house, and how far do we go, and how far do we view? Maybe there could be halachic nafkamina. If we say to Shavuot Kein Tadura, we have to view the Sukkah as a house, and maybe we view the floor in the same way. Okay, that's something interesting to think about. Rav Ovadia, in Chazon Avadia, he's also quite lenient on this. He, as is his derech in a number of different places, Rav Ovadia says we have a sveik sveika. Source number 18 is katav bebior halacha sham she'efshar שבזמן הזה שכל הבתים מרוצפים. זה לא שכיח כלל קרקע שאינו מוצף בבתים, אין מקום לגזור. Okay, that was the bior halacha that we saw nowadays when it's very, very common that the houses are going to be paved. That's the way it's going to be. וכן כתב בספר שבת שבת כהלכתה בשם ידידנו מורנו הרב רבי שלמה זלמן אוירבך. It says in the Shema Shabbat, and Rav Shlomo Zalman והוסיף שאפשר שמרוב הבתים מרוצפים, if most of the houses are paved, רואים את החצר המרוצפת כהמשך לבית המרוצף. Right, Rav Shlomo Zalman said we could view the courtyard as an extension of the house. And now says Rav Ovadia, v'chen badin la'akel. This is correct. This is the way we should be lenient. Keivan sheyesh b'zeh sfeik sveika le'eter. Since we have a sfeik, what is the what is the Sveika? One Safek is that maybe we view this as part of the house and we view it as paved, and the other Safek is that even if it wasn't, that it would still be, you would still be allowed to sweep it. Therefore, even the Ashkenazim can be lenient. One other issue which is raised, which was raised previously, is in terms of sweeping, which doesn't really seem to apply to us nowadays, is that it used to be that the piece of the brooms would break off while you were sweeping, and this would be a problem of soter, of destroying. So Rav Mordechai Eliyahu over here, source number 19, he says, he says nowadays we don't have to be concerned for this. You don't have to worry about breaking the broom. They used to have the brooms were made of straw, and the piece of straw would break. Nowadays we have strong brooms. They don't get weak, they don't break off, etc. So bottom line is, you can see here, page 264, see the summary of everything we've seen in the shir, right? We started off, we said, may one sweep the floor on Shabbat? So we said, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it was going to be an Isur D'Oraita. However, we said according to Chachamim, and that's why in Paskin, then it's Isur D'Rabbanan. So again, that's important to know. We discussed about the idea of asking a non-Jew to sweep. If we had said in the first place that it was an Isur D'Oraita, then we would not be able to say that, right? Generally speaking, when we talk about leniencies that we have for Amira La'akum, again, later on we'll explore this in more detail. But when it comes to Amra La'akum, generally speaking, where do we allow it? We allow what's called Shvut to Shvut, L'tzorach Mitzvah, L'tzorach Rabim, whatever. Say Shvut to Shvut, meaning it's an Isur, asking a non-Jew to perform a Melacha is an Isur D'Rabbanan. So if you ask them to perform, if the Isur D'Rabbanan of asking the non-Jew to perform the Isur D'Rabbanan, that's Shvut to Shvut, it's still forbidden. But if it's for the sake of a mitzvah, or for the sake of the tzibur, etc., there are cases where it's allowed. The one exception where Chachamim did allow one to say Amira L'Nochri, to ask a non-Jew to do something which is a biblical D'Oraita, that is for the sake of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. But again, one has to understand exactly what the parameters are there. But so going back to our summary. So we said it's rabbinically prohibited. Why is it prohibited? So first of all, if you look on the very, very left-hand side, right, you see the Bahag and the Rif, who said actually it's permitted as one doesn't intend to fulfill holes. But that was a Dad Yachid. The other, we saw three reasons. Either according to Rashi, prohibited because inevitably it will cause all the holes to be filled, or Tosfot because it moves the earth, which is probably Muktzah, right? Or the Rambam, who said that it's prohibited as it may lead to intentionally filling holes, right? So then we ask the question, okay, just the way right. So on the right hand side, going down. Right, two lines below that, we said, what about sweeping a stone floor? So we saw the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch said it's permitted. The Sefer Truma and later on the Ramah said no, even there it's forbidden, either because of the Gzerah or because you might fill in the holes in between. Comes along the Biur Halacha and said if all or most of the houses have wooden floors with no holes or stone floors, whatever, sweeping will be permitted, which is how we paskin. And then finally, we asked a question about the yard, sweeping outside, even the paved yard, according to Shmat Shabbat, that was forbidden. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Ovadia said we have what to rely on. Maybe it's an extension of the house, maybe it's a Sveika. And therefore, at the end of the day, if one needs to, you can sweep your house and you can sweep your sukkah, and we can have a very nice, clean floor for the rest of Shabbat. Okay,
So
now that we've...
Is it a general principle that if there's a gezerah that is made, but a majority of Bnei Yisrael is no longer under the assumptions of that gezerah, then you would don't have to follow the gezerah? Is that a general principle? Made a gezerah, like the floors here. Now, most of the world does not have dirt floors, and therefore we can nullify that gezerah because.
So you'd have to say, yeah, so you'd really, it's difficult to make sweeping assumptions like that.
Sweeping assumption.
You would have to, and generally speaking, it's quite unusual that we did that, we just say things like that. You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. But I think essentially the point that we're trying to make over here is that saying the Gzerah is made under certain circumstances. I think the argument here being made is that those circumstances, we're not in the circumstances of the gezerah. Because generally speaking, we do say, right, batata lo batata kana. In other words, even if the reasoning no longer applies, we still, unless we have a very, very compelling reason to say, we would not say that no, we can't follow the gezerah.
So
But
we can't apply that to like second day Yom Tov.
no, certainly not. All right. Shakar, have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Yeah.